Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 40. I cannot believe that I am saying that. We launched the podcast in the middle of a pandemic. We're now at the tail end of that pandemic. Things are not quite normal yet, but we're hoping that we're trending in that direction. And I hope that wherever you are, that things are good, or at least getting better. You know, one of the great things about doing this podcast is that I get to have conversations with people doing exceptional work. And today I am absolutely thrilled to be speaking with Dr. Joel Nigg. He is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience, vice chair for psychology, and director of the Center for ADHD Research at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Nigg is a leading researcher in the area of developmental psychopathology with a focus on ADHD. He is the author of 2 books on ADHD, including a recent book written for parents, Getting Ahead of ADHD, What Next Generation Science Says About Treatments That Work, and How You Can Make Them Work for Your Child. You have to check it out. You know, some kids with ADHD really struggled during the pandemic. Others thrived. And some parents are wondering after watching their kids learn at home for a year whether their child has ADHD. We are going to talk about all of that and discuss what the science says about how to support brain development and mental health in children with ADHD.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Nigg, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Karen. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad you're here as well. I mean, I have followed your work and I've read your book, Getting Ahead of ADHD, and I was just very eager to have you on the podcast. And I also read a recent blog that you wrote about mental health conditions, especially ADHD in the midst of COVID. So we are going to absolutely get to that.
Great.
But you know, now that things are beginning to open up, we're here, you know, I'm in Los Angeles and things are starting to open up. I think all the restrictions have been removed. And it seems that there's an increase in parents seeking assessments for their kids with ADHD because of things that they observed during remote learning. And or parents have had kids already diagnosed with ADHD and they feel like they've been negatively impacted by the pandemic and think that the symptoms have actually worsened. So are you seeing this too?
Yeah, I would confirm those impressions. I mean, the rise in referrals is known to everybody who's running a clinic. The wait lists have expanded, the referrals have expanded throughout the year, but of COVID, but it hasn't let up. And I think, you know, what you say is true, that as the years go on, it's just worn people down and the need for services has continued to climb. And as far as ADHD getting worse, that I think that also can be confirmed by the data, the surveys that I've seen. And you mentioned you have some international listeners. These come from different countries, including Israel and other countries in England where these surveys have been done. But they're showing consistently, regardless of where, that for kids with ADHD, it's hard. The families have had greater burden and greater distress than those who are caring for children without ADHD due to not being able to be in school and being at home. There's just that much more caregiver burden. And then that's going to cycle negatively, of course, on everyone, the parents, the child, where symptoms will seem worse and parents will feel worse. And there's a need for more support, more services, and some counseling or some intervention to modify the treatment plan from before. If you're in school, isn't going to work as well when you're working at home and trying to work on school. And certainly for ADHD kids, as any parent with his children knows, it's hard to manage the in-home remote schooling. And the studies clearly show that it's harder for those parents than for other parents without ADHD kids to manage what's difficult. If it's hard for all parents, in general, regardless of ADHD, families have suffered a lot of burden and distress increased during COVID, but it's even worse for families with kids with ADHD.
Right. And it seems that those parents where the ADHD was already diagnosed, even accessing treatment was difficult for many parents during the pandemic. And so, you know, they didn't get the support that they needed when they seemed like that they needed it the most.
That could well be. I mean, it took a while for it happened quickly by historical standards, but by the terms of immediate acute mental health needs, it took a while for insurance companies and hospitals and everybody to adjust to getting telehealth going and remote services going, getting all the technology in place. It really was probably not till late summer that everything was kind of humming as far as getting services remotely to people. And even then, that services were overwhelmed by the numbers of the need. So that if getting in-person services, of course, was hampered for obvious reasons, but getting remote services even is hard. And of course, remotely, you can't do as much as you can do in person.
Right. There has also been an increase in parents, seeking support or inquiring about ADHD for the first time. And how difficult do you think it's going to be to kind of distinguish between, difficulty because of the transition to remote learning versus an underlying ADHD that was always there, that was now uncovered by the circumstances related to the pandemic?
That is a great question. And I think we've already started running into it. And I think it is going to be very difficult because with diagnosing ADHD, it's so helpful to have that second set of eyes from a teacher or another caregiver to get a sense of situational specific versus situational general problems. And of course, you lose that advantage when you're at home all day with a child and you're a single situation, single setting. And we know as a general rule, and certainly for kids with ADHD, that when parents are stuck in the role of teacher also, it's just really, really hard because that dual role, the demands of a teacher are different than the demands of a parent. It's really hard to balance them when your child has ADHD. And so, but even if your child doesn't have ADHD, it's hard. I mean, even with kids who don't have ADHD but are having, say, learning problems, we try hard to help parents get into a situation where they're not the ones doing the tutoring because it just creates a role conflict that's very difficult for the child and the parent. So I think it's going to be hard because we just will have a hard time knowing until the dust settles whether that child and parent were struggling under this unique circumstance or whether there is, as you say, a more underlying difficulty that needs to be addressed now before it gets worse. It's going to be a real tough judgment call. I don't think we have good data for clinicians to know the right way to do that. So we're going to see a lot of judgment calls until we get a better sense of the data there. So I would certainly encourage taking a supportive approach and getting supportive service for the immediate concerns. And then if there is treatment instituted for a potential ADHD, to reevaluate that again after the child is back in school for a while and see if it still looks that way at school also. One of the mistakes that sometimes gets made is the ADHD diagnosis is given and treatment is started and nobody looks back. And I think that the idea that it's a permanent condition that can never change, maybe that needs to be let go of a little bit here to say maybe this child does have what looks like ADHD or for now, but maybe that's not really going to stay with them in a new situation. So I think that would be the big encouragement would be to look at it again once the situation changes.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice for parents and for clinicians who are trying to figure out, the symptoms that they're seeing, what is the cause, the underlying reason for it? And is it really an ADHD or something else? And, you kind of alluded to the fact that there are treatments for ADHD and they include medication. But you have outlined beautifully in your book that there are specific lifestyle changes that have been proven to support the developing brain and can help children with ADHD. And it seems like some of those can be implemented immediately, even for kids who have ADHD, of course, but even with suspected ADHD that would be beneficial now.
Absolutely. And this is a great point for COVID, where self-care and stress reduction are obviously so important and so hard to do because it's just kind of relentless or has been relentless. I know it is opening up in some ways for people now, and we can talk about that too. But yeah, I certainly the standard things that are good for kind of heart health and body health are good for brain health too, only even more because the brain is so sensitive to its external environment and adapts so quickly to. So really good nutrition. It can really help. Anti-inflammatory, like omega-3 fish oil, is demonstrated to have some benefit. These are not cure-alls, but these will have some benefit. Exercise, of course, is always helpful, and it doesn't need to be, a sport. It doesn't need to be a team sport. It can be anything that's fun and active. And a lot of kids with ADHD don't want to do team sports, or they don't want to do a particular activity, but there might be something else they do like, and so. Kind of looking around for something that's enjoyable and active is a great benefit for the whole family. And then, for parents, I think a real challenge here is the self-care. And this is also what the studies are showing, is if the parents can get the self-care, they can really reduce their own stress, and that helps the child, because the child, of course, is going to key off the parent's stress level and accelerate their own difficulty in response. But getting self-care as a parent has been one of the challenges during COVID, because there's not as much time and space. So one of the, I think, valuable goals for all of us who have kids at home during COVID is to really think hard about how can we structure our day so that we can get the self-care in. Now, if you're a single parent, obviously it's even harder, but you're working and trying to take care of your child while you're working, like a lot of people are doing, very challenging. But that's a key if you can manage to get that self-care for yourself as a parent. So the family stress level, nutrition for the child, and exercise for the child, those are the big three, I think. And doing what you can to look at even one of those,
right,
make a difference.
And it seems like that exercise is part of that self-care.
Exercise absolutely is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And, even though things are starting to open up, I'm seeing more stress for a lot of parents. I just dropped off my kids at camp, and all these parents are trying to figure out how to get back into the work mode. But some parents have their kids at home for the summer, and now they're still trying to balance working from home. And so they had a little bit of a reprieve when the kids had transitioned back to school, even for hybrid. And now it feels like they're back where they started in March 2020, when they're trying to balance both things, because there aren't a lot of openings for a lot of camps because they've reduced the number of students that they're taking in.
That's right. It's summer is always a challenge because you got to figure out that work and child care balance. But now it's like you say, it's you haven't had the school year to have a different rhythm. Right. Behind you, you're just continuing what was difficult before, and B, as you say, there's less opportunities because of all the reasons related to COVID, even though things are opening up somewhat.
Mm-hmm. And, you talked about exercise, and I absolutely agree that that's so important for not only the ADHD symptomatology, but for mental health in general.
Yeah.
And another factor that I'd love to kind of expand on is and I know you've done a lot of work in this area, is really sleep, because so many people have experienced, adults and children alike have experienced disturbances in sleep over the past year. And it is such an important part of not only our emotional well-being, but brain development and learning and memory. Now's a great time to kind of get some good sleep habits in. Can you talk to the listeners a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing it up. It's completely right. In fact, after I said that was the big three, the first thing that popped into my head was, what about sleep? That's the big four, because sleep is so vital. And it's for a lot of reasons. One reason that is often not appreciated is sleep is really where learning is consolidated. And so kids learn better if they get enough sleep, because all that activity during sleep, we used to think it was just noise. It's the brain filing system, sorting and filing memories and associations so that stuff is learned. So we know from the data that even babies and children, if they sleep after they've exposed to new knowledge and then come back, they remember it better than if they don't sleep afterwards. And so for those that are still napping, the nap remains important. For those that are not napping but sleeping, it's getting those full hours of sleep. And I've written about this, and it's in the book too, but the hours of sleep that little children need, or even that school-age children and teens need, it surprised me when I first went back over those rules, because we're all so used to getting by on less sleep, and how early kids really should be going to bed to get enough sleep. It's pretty early. You really want kids to be getting not 8 hours, but depending on their age, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours of sleep. And so they need to be getting to bed at 7 o'clock if they're going to get up at 6 in the morning. And so really looking at those sleep tables and looking at how much sleep they need is going to be a big help. And for ADHD kids, of course, as too many of your listeners know, sleep-related behavior problems are a big challenge. The child doesn't want to go to bed or has a meltdown at his bedtime, and getting that routine back on track. The good news is there are ways to do that. We have behavioral programs for a lot of aspects of ADHD. Some of them work well, some of them don't work well, but behavioral programs to get sleep schedule going work well. And so there's good data that with the right behavioral program and a little bit of counseling, and this is not a situation where you need years of counseling, even a couple of sessions with an expert counselor can help you to get your child's sleep schedule back on track. And the real key is shifting that tone to positive experiences around sleep, and creating that as a positive, loving family time and a little bit of a fun time. But there's some transition work to do there and some change in expectations needed when the child's been on a negative cycle with sleep. And that's where the counseling can help to make that. What you need is a transition plan to make that shift. It won't just happen by deciding that's how it's going to be. So it takes a bit of transition to re-educate the child and help the child learn a different way of going about it.
Absolutely. And it seems encouraging. I think it would be encouraging to parents to know that, again, like you said, it's not years of therapy. It could be a couple of sessions with an experienced clinician to help not only the child, but the whole family get back on track with respect to sleep, because it seems like parent modeling of that behavior is so important, especially during this past year where parents were trying to recoup some work hours, you know, late into the evening and were sleep deprived themselves.
Exactly.
And the children's schedules were off as well.
Right. That's right. The other piece that gets lost there, and I know families are feeling this, is what about downtime for the family? What about just time to hang out, relax, have fun, everybody do what they feel like for a little while, or everybody watch a movie together, have some popcorn, whatever it might be for that particular family that's relaxing, take a walk, go to the park, have a picnic. Those kind of things are becoming harder to do for the reason that you said. You're trying to make up lost work time. Your child's got homework that they couldn't do during the day because you couldn't supervise them because you had to work because they're doing remote schooling. The challenges of just getting those simple de-stressing experiences and rhythm of life have gotten harder to do, and families are missing that. And so part of the transition challenge now is to figure out how to get back into those new routines and remember how to do that when things aren't really quite normal at this point.
Exactly. We think we keep talking about this new normal, but we're getting there. This is all still part of a transition. Right. And it seems like, when you talk about sleep, and I think about screen media exposure and technology, and, we talked on another episode about how so many parents just kind of threw their hands up in the air and said, there's, this is a strange time. There's nothing really I can do. Let's let them have more TV, more iPad, more phone. But it seems like that would exacerbate the sleep disturbance issues that you just mentioned.
That's a really key point. And as you pointed out, it's just become a real dilemma. And I know we've had some studies on this, and some of them have been encouraging and some of them haven't been encouraging about what the extra screen time is doing to kids' learning during COVID, because you're right. I mean, for many parents, there's just no choice. They have to do more screen time to get through this for their child. And on the one hand, the good news is that a little bit more screen time for a while isn't going to be the end of the world for your child's development. But on the other hand, if the content is upsetting or disturbing or violent, or as you're alluding to, if it's too close to bedtime, it's going to make things worse. And so kind of monitoring that content, sure, okay, they need to watch stuff, but let me know what it's going to be. Let's monitor, not just let it be roam the internet and find stuff that's going to provoke or disturb. Keep track of the social media for kids who are doing a lot of the social media interacting. Keep track of how that's going, because sometimes that becomes a source of real stress on children if they're getting online bullying going on or something. But as far as sleep goes, the key thing is that what they call blue light, and blue light is daylight, but believe it or not, our screens, our phones, our computers, our iPads are loaded with blue light. And blue light affects the brain in a particular way, affects brain chemistry in a way that keeps us awake. That's why we wake up when the sun hits our face, and that's why we don't go to sleep well if the bright lights are on. And if you've been looking at your phone as you're getting into bed, you're going to have a harder, lower quality sleep. You might still fall asleep, but it won't be as good of quality sleep. So really finding a way to substitute something else for that last hour before bedtime that's not blue light. The screen's off. It's hard to do. Our family has a hard time doing it. All families have a hard time doing it because screens can also be relaxing. But finding some other way to relax that last hour can be a real help if sleep does not seem adequate.
And so part of that transition to sleep that you spoke about earlier seems like it really has to include, turning those screens off during that time to eliminate that blue light exposure as the brain prepares for, releasing all of those hormones that are needed for sleep.
That's really the optimal. It's hard to do, but that's really the optimal is turn the screens off, get the screens out of the bedrooms. And as parents, it's tough because we want to be checking our email one last time or making plans for tomorrow with colleagues. And, but doing that, while you're telling the child not to use their screen is obviously a tough sell. And so, especially if the kids get older and they start calling out hypocrisy. So, making a family rule for bedtime and again, I know it's hard. Our family struggles with that. All families struggle with that. But that's really the optimal, is to get those screens out of the sleep routine.
Yeah, and we struggle with that too. And when you say that the older kids calling out hypocrisy, my 7-year-old does.
Yeah, that's right.
So he realizes it too. Wait a second, you still have your phone on.
That's right. And even for preschoolers and toddlers, they want to copy whatever you're doing.
Right.
So if you're looking at a screen, that's what they want to go do. And if you're sitting reading a book or scratching your nose, they're going to want to scratch their nose, So it's kind of being aware of that modeling is happening even when they're not calling it out verbally.
Right. And, while we're on the topic of media exposure, I think some parents have, and it kind of brings me back to my earlier question about ADHD symptomatology during COVID. Some parents are concerned that media use causing the ADHD symptoms. And, is there an association, for our listeners between those two?
Very, very tiny. I'm really not very impressed as that is the major cause of ADHD, even though intuitively it makes so much sense. But as long as we're not talking about screen time for babies, I think it might be, quite harmful. But if you're over 2 years old, your screen time is going to cause a lot of other problems, but not ADHD. It contributes a very small amount, enough that you can easily overcome that contribution by other good lifestyle changes. The risks from screen time have much more to do with modeling of violence, which of course is a problem for adults in our society now too. Modeling of rudeness, modeling of uncourteous behavior has become a problem for our whole society, but in the modern world. But for children, it's a real problem because that becomes their social experience. And then the other risk is really depression and anxiety coming from negative experiences in online exchanges, whether it's not FaceTime anymore for kids, but the FaceTime analogs that kids are using in a given year or a given generation. Those are really the risks. And so for parents, the key is to monitor that experience. If they see the child's mood kind of declining in association with using the device, and for teens, that's typically going to be the social interaction that's going on. For younger kids, it's going to be the modeling of material that's too hard for them to digest or handle. For adults, we can watch something kind of crazy on the screen, and it doesn't change our behavior because we can bracket it in our mind as that's the nonsense on the screen. But for kids, that's part of their social world. They don't know the difference when they're little. And so it's the same as if they really saw something in real life and they start modeling that as part of how you're supposed to learn and behave. So that's really the thing to watch, is the nature of that content being positive for young kids and the stressfulness of the social exchanges, which of course can be a big positive for teens too. They can get their support that way, but it can also turn stressful. And that's what you have to watch out for as a parent.
Right. And then it just kind of speaks to the idea that parents really have to be monitoring what their kids are being exposed to during media. And I know for a lot of parents, it's been hard during this time because, like you said, there's for parents, they feel like they don't have any choice if they have to be on a video conference call and the child is there because they can't be in school or they can't be at camp.
And they're too little to occupy themselves any other way. No, I agree. And I think the reassurance I'd give parents is it's only been for a few months or a year. This is not the new way of life. And you've got a lot of other positives that are counteracting any negatives there. So this is not going to be the be all and end all. So there's some reassurance there, but obviously you want to keep an eye on it as well, even though sometimes you don't have any choice. The other thing to remember about screen time is the main harm that it causes for development is it takes away from other experiences that children need if they're on there too much. So that means they're not getting exercise. They're not interacting with real people like their parents. They're not talking to friends face to face. It's just online. And I know it's a brave new world about online relationships, and we have to adapt to that as adults who didn't grow up that way. But there's still something to be said for the actual face to face experience. But if your child is getting enough exercise, some outdoor time, etc., there's less and less time to be on the screen. So one way that I try to think about it for parents and for our family too is, let's do the screen after we've taken care of our basic healthy lifestyle stuff. Let's make sure we've gotten our outdoor time, our physical activity, eaten our good meal, got enough sleep. If there's still time to enjoy the screen, fine. But we're talking here about during the school day when you're trying to balance child needs their homework. They also need a break. They also need to let you get your video call in. And just acknowledge those are tough balances. And a little self-compassion may be necessary here to recognize nothing's going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Absolutely. That self-compassion is key for parents, for parents everywhere.
Yeah.
And, you spoke a little bit a minute ago about kind of depression and anxiety, and we were talking about it in relation to exposure to content on the screens. And the CDC and the American Psychological Association both reported spikes in depression and anxiety over the past year. And we know that children with ADHD are more vulnerable to mental health struggles. What are some trends you're seeing, and should we feel better now that things are starting to open up?
We certainly have seen the trend, especially early in the pandemic, before everybody kind of got their sea legs, of increased anxiety, depression, suicidality in teens. That seems to have settled down somewhat now, as there's been more of a rhythm to life and school and online friendships and so on, and pods being created. I think all that has begun to help. But it makes a lot of sense that kids would be getting, especially teens, we've heard this from parent after parent, and see it in the studies too, that the lack of access to their peers is so critical for their development. And letting the online access replace that is necessary, going back to our use of devices. But now getting back to more normal shared activity, whether it's going out and doing a shared physical activity for those that are not relying only on online, can be such a benefit for kids' mental health, just like it is for adults. Social support is fundamental to our mental health and stress management. So I have hopes that we will see some settling back down as we get back to a more open way of life. But these kids are developing, and, this is an experience that they've had that's profound. And it probably, the good and bad news is it will have some effect on their development that'll be long lasting. Some of those things may be negative and some may be positive. I can refer back to one of the classic studies that we have going back to the 1930s, children who grew up during the Great Depression and then were followed for the rest of their life into their 80s by researchers, generation after generation of researchers. And they really saw that generation, and those who still have parents or grandparents alive from that generation, or may remember this, but that generation had a certain set of strengths and weaknesses around, for example, how they viewed money and how they viewed borrowing. That was distinctive, how they viewed work ethic, and some of those were strengths and some were weaknesses as the world changed. And the same may be true here, that kids have learned something from this COVID. Maybe they've learned to be very respectful of infectious disease. Maybe on the other hand, they've learned some negative things too, or lost some things that they needed. So I think it's going to be very, very important for us in the research community and the clinical community, and for parents to kind of be noting the things that may have shifted for their child in development that may be attributable to what was a major historical event affecting this generation of kids.
And it seems like there's going to be a continued need for support for children because they're getting ready to, again, transition to another change, going back to school, which may look different than it did when they were in school. Some students have been in remote learning this entire year, and they haven't been in an in-person, which can also create some anxiety because they have not interacted with other people for over a year. Yes. And, what are some things that parents can do to help children cope with, this, even though the COVID numbers are decreasing, there's still this COVID related stress because circumstances have changed.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would return here to the fundamentals of how to build resilience in children. And I wrote about that in the book too. But, some of these principles include, you can normalize experiences. You can loan the child your coping strategies. Here's a way of thinking about it that maybe the child hasn't thought of. You can remember that a stressful experience that's successfully handled strengthens a person. And so it can be seen as an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to learn something new. So there's a variety of ways to reframe for kids, support kids, normalize the challenges. This is challenging for everyone. And so some of those just basic resilience strategies for kids, reminding them of your faith and pride in them that's going to be unwavering. And, all those fundamentals of building resilience in kids are going to be helpful here as they come back to this really unpredictable, I think still unpredictable situation for the fall. The plans have been made, the plans have changed and been made again. And it's only June. And I know from my colleagues who are teachers and principals and so on that they've got to make plans at this point and go with it, but they may be facing unexpected changes in the fall again. So preparing our kids to kind of roll with these changes and recognize that there's a lot of ways to learn and be. Those are all modeling and coaching that we can do, and maintaining that communication with our children. So fundamental to just what is their experience? What are they thinking, seeing, hearing? We're getting them to talk about it. Obviously, some kids just don't want to do that, and it's a challenge, but that's kind of what we want to get to.
Yeah. And I think that's really great guidance for parents as they're trying to navigate. Like you said, there's still so much uncertainty. We keep hearing about the new variants that are emerging. And there are a lot of kids under the age of 12 who still don't have access to a vaccine. So there's still some parents who have their own heightened anxiety about making that decision for their children, what that means. And then if they decide not to move forward with the vaccine for a young child, how do they protect them with these new variants emerging?
Absolutely. Absolutely right. No, that's right. It's a real tough call because on the one hand, that child needs that social experience. They need that learning. On the other hand, what's the risk level? Who are these people in the classroom? We don't know them all. These are going to be tough decisions for parents. And I would just go back to recognizing that it is a difficult decision and getting as much information as possible. For example, we're learning now through the research how costly it is to kids learning not to be in the classroom, and how difficult it is for online learning for so many children. And so the in-school learning is so valuable. That's a big argument in favor of taking the chance and getting into the school. On the other hand, children are vulnerable. They haven't been vaccinated. COVID is usually survivable without permanent harm to children, but it's still a serious illness and a risky illness that I don't want my child to get, So I think it's a tough call, a tough balance, and it really depends on the situation at that time. We might feel like by September, it feels like a pretty good gamble to say, sure, there's some chance that there's a chance too, they'll get a flu or the cold or even COVID. But without that, there's a certainty that they'll have setbacks in their learning. So I'm going to go ahead and gamble on going to school. But maybe the numbers will change and the guidance will change too. It is really a question of staying alert and trying to trust good information. I do think that the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control are giving, reasonably good information. I mean, obviously they can't always be up to the very minute with some of the latest findings, and they've had to change as new data has come out with this fast changing situation over the past year and a half. But as things have kind of settled into a pattern here and the data has gotten more consistent, I think these federal agencies are giving reasonable guidance. And most of the hospitals that I'm aware of, the major hospitals, if you're near a major medical center, have web pages. Or, of course, on the internet, you can go to any hospital you want. Look at Johns Hopkins, Columbia, the major medical centers around the world. Our hospital, or Oregon Health and Science University, has an excellent web page with information and resources, and Mayo Clinic, all these major medical centers. They're going to have current recommendations and information that are going to be very, very helpful. And I encourage parents to go to these major centers as well. And when those don't align with what the CDC is saying on their webpage guidance, then that's a place to really maybe seek, advice from your pediatrician on what they are being told, for their profession. I think a lot of pediatricians are trying hard to keep up on the information here.
That's great advice. And I'm going to make sure that we put links to those hospitals and medical centers in the show notes so parents can get some additional information to help them make informed decisions. So thank you for that. In your book, you provide guidance on balancing traditional and emerging alternative treatments for ADHD. And it is a great resource for those who are already diagnosed or newly diagnosed with ADHD who want to know more about it. I think it's helped clinicians, researchers, educators, and parents better understand ADHD and the mental health challenges. And so I just wanted to thank you for writing the book, and we're definitely going to put a link to it in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
So Dr. Nigg, I know that your organization has a new initiative. I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about it and how they can even be involved.
Oh, thanks for the chance to talk about that, Karen. Yeah, we Oregon Health and Science University has launched a new Center for ADHD Research with a $25 million matching campaign of fundraising to fund innovative and cutting edge studies. And the goal really is to make new discoveries, doing studies that won't be done otherwise, by marrying philanthropic giving with federal grant support and bringing together, really crackerjack teams of top researchers who are just expert in their field and across disciplines and even across the country as needed. So We have a center webpage that's got some information on it that I know you can put in your notes. There is an opportunity there to read about the matching gift campaign. If you're someone who's got the means to give to nonprofit causes and would want to consider adding this to your list of potential places to give, I would encourage you to look at that. It's a great way to support efforts to address the mental health crisis coming out of COVID, which has obviously gotten only increased, as well as the ongoing mental health challenges of kids in our nation. It's our leading health problem by many metrics, and it's a great way to contribute to new knowledge and new clinical trials and so on. So I appreciate the chance to say that word, and I encourage folks that have the means in their world to take a look at that.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely put a link to that site in the show notes so that parents and families and researchers and clinicians and anyone else who's interested in this important work can contribute.
Thank you.
I really appreciate having this discussion with you today. I think it's going to be very helpful to a lot of parents who are trying to figure out, what to do now to support my child who I think has ADHD, who I know has ADHD, or who's struggling with other mental health challenges or stress related to COVID. And I think you've really outlined a number of lifestyle changes that can be made right now to make a difference. So again, I appreciate the guidance that you continue to give families.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here, Karen.
Before we jumped into this conversation, Dr. Nigg shared with me that he enjoys opportunities to share information beyond our network of colleagues. And that is the whole reason I started this podcast, to get more information into the hands of more people so that we can help more children and adolescents enjoy their lives and reach their full potential. I hope you learned something from this episode, and if you did, let me know. You can email me at drkiwilson@childnexus.com or share your thoughts on our Instagram page @ChildNexusCommunity. Better yet, share the episode with someone else. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.